Dawn breaks on June 6, 1942, in the remote waters of the Pacific. The waves are still scarred with oil slicks and floating wreckage from the Battle of Midway, just days before. Black smoke lingers on the horizon, where the burning hulk of the Japanese carrier Akagi had slipped beneath the sea. For the men of the Imperial Japanese Navy, there is a grim satisfaction. For of their own carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu had been lost in rapid succession. It was a blow that stung, but the Japanese still believed themselves capable of dictating the pace of the Pacific War. After all, they had bloodied the Americans badly at Pearl Harbor just 6 months earlier. And yet, as reconnaissance planes scouted the waves in the days after Midway, the Japanese began hearing reports they could not believe. American carriers, supposedly crippled, supposedly out of the fight, were being spotted again, steaming defiantly into the theater of war. U.S. Navy log, June 1942, the scene seemed impossible. At Pearl Harbor, torpedoes had torn into the USS Yorktown, leaving her limping and scorched. At Midway, she had been struck again, bombs carving holes into her decks, flames consuming her hangars. Japanese pilots swore they had finished the job. The carrier was sinking, they believed, another nail in the coffin of America's fleet. But within days, American sailors, shipyard workers, and naval engineers had accomplished what, to the Japanese mind, was beyond imagination. They had raised her, patched her, and thrust her back into battle at breakneck speed. After-action report, Midway, June 1942. It is here that the story begins, in the clash of two naval powers, one relying on doctrine and long preparation, the other leaning on improvisation, repair, and a logistical miracle. The year was 1942. Japan's empire stretched like a steel fan across the Pacific, Burma to the Solomons, Malaya to the Philippines. Their navy, built on the creed of Kantai Kessen, the decisive fleet engagement, sailed with confidence that America's industrial sprawl would take years to wake. The Japanese had at their disposal the Kido Butai, the most experienced carrier strike force in the world, commanded by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who believed one crushing blow after another would keep the Americans subdued. Combined Fleet Orders, May 1942. Against this stood Admiral Chester Nimitz and the men of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, fighting not just with warships, but with time itself. America had carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, but they were precious and few. Every hull mattered. Every plane mattered. And unlike the Japanese, who trained for years to perfect each carrier crew, the Americans were learning at a furious pace, their survival depending on speed and adaptation. Nimitz Papers, Naval War College Archives. The Battle of Midway, fought between June 4th and June 7th, was meant to be the crown jewel of Yamamoto's strategy. By drawing out the American carriers and ambushing them, the Japanese hoped to annihilate the last major obstacle to their dominance of the Pacific. Instead, thanks to broken Japanese codes and bold American pilots, the Kido Butai lost 4 of its frontline carriers in a single day. But while Japan mourned the loss of its striking arm, its intelligence officers still believed they had crippled their opponent beyond quick recovery. Yorktown, after all, had been savaged. The Japanese air groups reported direct hits and near-certain destruction. What they did not realize was that behind the front lines, an entirely different war was being fought, one of hammers, welding torches, pumps, and sheer industrial grit. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. In the aftermath of Coral Sea in May 1942, the Yorktown had limped back to Pearl Harbor with her flight deck torn and her hull pierced. Naval engineers estimated she would need 3 months in dry dock before she could rejoin the fleet. But Nimitz, desperate for every available carrier at Midway, demanded the impossible. Shipyard crews swarmed her battered hull, working around the clock in 12-hour shifts. They pumped out seawater, patched holes with steel plating, rewired destroyed circuits, and laid fresh timber along her scorched decks. In just 72 hours, Yorktown was made battle-ready, not perfect, not fully healed, but able to sail and fight. Pearl Harbor Navy Yard Report, June 1942. For the Japanese, this was inconceivable. Their doctrine demanded long, precise overhauls. Their naval industry was not designed to turn wrecks into fighting ships overnight. To them, A carrier struck as Yorktown had been was considered lost for months, if not years. The idea that American carriers could reappear mere days after catastrophic damage felt like ghosts rising from the sea. Japanese reconnaissance pilots, peering down from cloud banks, sent back reports that their commanders dismissed as mistakes. "It cannot be Yorktown," one officer insisted. "It is not possible." Dramatized composite, Japanese fleet intercept logs, June 1942, but it was possible. It was happening. The industrial might of the United States, factories in California, shipyards in Hawaii, welders in overalls, and sparks flying in the night, was rewriting the tempo of naval warfare. America would not wait months for repairs. America would return in days. And as Japanese sailors scanned the horizon in the wake of Midway, still stunned by their losses, they realized a darker truth. They were not fighting just ships. They were fighting an enemy whose industry could raise the dead. U.S. Navy Bureau of Ships Report, 1943, the shock rippled across the ranks. Japanese pilots who had seen Yorktown ablaze at Midway could not reconcile her sudden reappearance. Their commanders, who had believed America's carrier strength broken, now faced a foe that defied calculation. The war of attrition they had hoped to avoid was already tightening around them, and they had no answer to the miracle of American repair. The men of Japan's Navy began to ask in hushed tones, "If the Americans can resurrect carriers in days, what hope is there for us?" Captured pilot interrogation, August 1942. And yet, the secret was not magic. It was the convergence of discipline, desperation, and the ingenuity of thousands of unsung laborers who worked without rest. Engineers smeared with grease, shipfitters bent over welds, electricians rerouting entire power systems under floodlights. These were the hidden warriors of Midway. They fought not with guns or bombs, but with time itself, buying the fleet a chance at survival. Pearl Harbor Navy Yard labor logs, June 1942. The Pacific War was still young, and Japan remained formidable. But the illusion of American fragility had been shattered. What Japan had believed to be their greatest strength, careful planning, patient precision, was being turned against them. In this new war, speed was the weapon, and America had found a way to wield it. As the smoke of Midway drifted across the sea, the question loomed larger than any ship's silhouette on the horizon. If the Americans could do this once, how many more times could they do it again? The answer would come in the next battles, in the next months. As Japan's Navy discovered just how relentless its enemy could be in the aftermath of Midway. The Japanese Naval General Staff scoured its reports with disbelief. Their intelligence had promised them a weakened enemy, a fleet unable to contest Japan's expansion. Yet American carriers had returned within days of suffering catastrophic damage, defying every expectation. To understand why, one must pull back the curtain not on the flight decks of battle, but on the shipyards, foundries, and design tables that kept those carriers alive. The true hidden advantage was not simply in American ships. It was in the speed and resilience of American repair, logistics, and engineering doctrine. U.S. Navy Bureau of Ships Report, 1943. At the heart of this system was Pearl Harbor Navy Yard, a sprawling hive of activity on Oahu's southern shore. Here, thousands of skilled laborers, many of them civilian welders, pipe fitters, electricians, and machinists, worked shoulder to shoulder with uniformed sailors. Under the direction of Rear Admiral Homer N. Wallen, known as the father of fleet repair, the yard had developed emergency repair doctrines that bypassed red tape and convention. Wallen understood that in 1942, time was more valuable than perfection. "If she can float and launch planes, she can fight," was the mantra of his repair crews. Wallen Oral History, Naval Institute Archives. The contrast with Japanese doctrine was stark. The Imperial Navy believed in meticulous, long-haul overhauls, often requiring damaged ships to return to home ports like Kure or Yokosuka for months of refitting. Their repair crews were fewer, their facilities stretched across a distant empire, and their culture emphasized precision over improvisation. American doctrine flipped this on its head: patch it fast, fight with it now, and fix it better later. That mentality meant a carrier like Yorktown, written off by Japanese pilots, could be rearmed and pushed into battle in record time. Captured Japanese Doctrine Analysis, U.S. Naval War College, 1945. Technically, the speed of American repair was staggering. During the 72-hour overhaul of Yorktown in late May 1942, shipyard crews worked in shifts so relentless that welders collapsed from exhaustion. More than 1,400 tons of water were pumped from her flooded compartments. Steel plates were cut and welded into her torn hull, sealing breaches large enough to swallow trucks. Her boilers, knocked offline by coral sea damage, were patched and coaxed back into function with makeshift piping. Even her wooden flight deck, charred and gouged, was refitted with fresh timber flown in from California. Pearl Harbor Navy Yard Action Report, May 1942. Behind these miracles were industrial titans. Companies like Bethlehem Steel, Newport News Shipbuilding, and the Mare Island Naval Shipyard on the West Coast had pioneered modular construction techniques, allowing repair crews to swap out massive structural pieces like components rather than rebuild them painstakingly. The Detroit Arsenal, while famed for tanks, also supplied naval-grade steel rolled in dimensions that matched carrier specifications. Even General Electric and Westinghouse contributed, shipping spare generators and motors by air to Pearl Harbor. This integration of industry into combat timelines was something the Japanese could scarcely match. U.S. War Production Board Report, 1943, but repair was only half the story. The hidden advantage also lay in American naval intelligence and logistics. Knowing where and when to position damaged carriers for rapid return to combat was a chess game of staggering proportions. Nimitz gambled heavily on sending Yorktown into Midway, despite her fragile state. His staff calculated that even a wounded carrier, if able to launch sorties, could tip the balance of battle. And they were right. Yorktown launched planes that helped cripple Soryu and Hiryu, forcing Japan onto the defensive. U.S. Navy Operational Report, Midway, 1942. The psychological impact on the Japanese was immense. In pilot debriefings, men who had dropped bombs onto Yorktown swore they had destroyed her beyond saving. When she reappeared, Japanese officers dismissed the sightings as errors or misidentifications. But when intelligence confirmed it was indeed Yorktown, disbelief turned to dread. Their ships rise again, like phantoms, one captured Japanese aviator later confessed during interrogation. Dramatized composite, captured pilot interrogation. July 1942. To see the hidden advantage in full light, one must examine a decisive battle that unfolded only weeks later. The Battle of the Eastern Solomons. August 24, 1942. By this time, Japan had already lost 4 carriers at Midway, but still sought to contest American advances around Guadalcanal. The Americans, against all odds, put forward the carriers Enterprise and Saratoga, while the Japanese committed Shokaku and Zuikaku. Once again, Japanese planners expected a worn-down American fleet. Once again, they were met with surprise. U.S. Pacific Fleet War Diary, August 1942. In this battle, it was the quick repair of Enterprise that stole the spotlight. Struck by 3 bombs from Japanese dive bombers, she reeled under exploding aviation fuel and shattered machinery. Fires raged, her decks buckled, and her rudder jammed. By Japanese standards, she should have been a loss, towed back to Yokosuka for half a year of repairs. Instead, American damage control teams, trained rigorously after the Pearl Harbor disaster, fought like demons. Firefighters used foam and seawater to contain blazes, while engineers in gas masks crawled through smoke-filled compartments to patch ruptured steam lines. Within hours, Enterprise was stable. Within days, repair ships Vestal and Alcor, supported by Pearl Harbor Yard crews flown out to forward bases, restored her enough to continue operations. Damage Control School Report, Pearl Harbor, 1942. Technically, the details were astonishing. Bomb craters in her flight deck were covered with steel patches bolted directly over the holes, crude but functional. Electrical power was rerouted through emergency switchboards cobbled together by electricians using spare parts scavenged from destroyers. Her elevators, critical for moving planes, were jury-rigged with makeshift hydraulic repairs. Even her anti-aircraft batteries, damaged by shrapnel, were quickly welded back into place by machinists wielding portable torches. Each repair was temporary, but collectively they gave Enterprise a second life on the battlefield. Technical Manual TM 9-294, 1943. The Japanese after-action reports from the Eastern Solomons speak volumes. They recorded heavy hits on Enterprise and claimed her destruction, yet weeks later, she was reported operating again. To the Japanese mind, this bordered on sorcery. Their doctrine had not prepared them for an opponent who fought battles not only at sea, but also with welding torches in the dead of night. They repair their carriers before our wounded can even leave port, lamented one officer in a dramatized composite, war diary. Captured Japanese naval staff papers, 1945. The Americans themselves recognized that their hidden advantage was not glamorous, but essential. Repair is combat, Admiral Nimitz remarked, acknowledging that every patched hole, every rewired circuit, was as decisive as any torpedo hit. Naval architects like George Campbell and chief engineers at Pearl Harbor devised field kits of prefabricated steel and piping that could be shipped forward to repair ships, enabling rapid fixes in forward anchorages like Espiritu Santo. This industrial foresight meant that America's carriers could bleed and fight again, while Japan's wounded hulls often limped home never to return. Bureau of Ships Technical Bulletin, 1943. By the close of 1942, the pattern was undeniable. Battles like Midway, Eastern Solomons, and later Santa Cruz revealed that America's carriers were not just warships, they were survivors. Japan could land devastating blows, but unless they sank a carrier outright, it was likely to return to battle in weeks, sometimes days. The psychological toll was crushing. For every American ship that re-emerged, Japanese morale sank further, eroding faith in their Navy's ability to secure a decisive victory. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. The war of attrition was shifting. Japan had planned for short, decisive wars. America was fighting a long one, with industry as its shield. And while Japanese sailors stared across the waves at an enemy they thought beaten, the reality was dawning. They were up against not just ships, but an industrial machine that refused to let those ships die. Yet this was only the beginning. What the Japanese had seen at Midway and the Solomons was a glimpse of a far larger truth, that America's hidden advantage would shape not just single battles, but the very trajectory of the Pacific War. The question now was not whether America could return its carriers to battle in days. It was what that relentless rhythm would mean for the long, grinding campaigns still to come. The months that followed Midway and the Eastern Solomons revealed a truth more devastating to Japan than any single torpedo or bomb. It was not just that American carriers could be repaired in record time. It was that this rhythm of destruction and resurrection would steadily erode the Japanese Navy's fighting spirit, its strategic planning, and ultimately its hope of victory. The hidden advantage had blossomed into a campaign-defining force, America's industrial resilience. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. By late 1942, Guadalcanal had become the crucible of the Pacific War. Here, on a jungle island surrounded by treacherous seas, carriers, cruisers, and destroyers clashed in desperate battles. Each side bled heavily, but the difference lay in what happened afterward. When the carrier Enterprise was bombed and battered in the waters around the Solomons, she was not abandoned. Damage control officers and repair crews fought to stabilize her, and within weeks, she was back, launching fighters to support embattled Marines on the ground. By contrast, when Japan's Shokaku was hit and crippled during Coral Sea and later Santa Cruz, she spent months in Yokosuka undergoing lengthy refits, absent during critical campaigns. Bureau of Ships Report, 1943. This disparity was not lost on the men who fought. American sailors began to view their ships almost as living beings, wounded but unkillable, patched and scarred, yet always returning to the fight. She won't die. One gunner's mate wrote of the Enterprise after watching her patched flight deck host fresh squadrons of wildcats. USS Enterprise deck log, October 1942. For the Japanese, the effect was the reverse. Pilots reported destroying carriers, only to learn weeks later that the same ships had returned. This eroded confidence in after-action assessments and sowed frustration within the ranks. We strike them down, but they rise again, a Japanese aviator confided in a dramatized composite interview after the war. Captured pilot testimony, 1945. Strategically, this cycle reshaped the Pacific. Admiral Nimitz and his staff understood that keeping carriers in the fight, even if scarred, shifted momentum. Every day, a carrier remained operational meant planes over Guadalcanal, supplies protected, and convoys shielded. By late 1942, the U.S. Navy could keep rotating damaged ships back into action, while Japan's carrier arm dwindled in both number and readiness. The long war Japan had feared was no longer hypothetical. It was reality. U.S. Pacific Fleet Operations Summary, 1942. The psychological dimension was equally decisive. Morale, as much as tonnage or firepower, dictates the endurance of navies. American sailors drew pride from their ability to endure, believing that no hit, however devastating, could truly erase their fleet. This belief was fed by the tireless work of engineers and technicians. In makeshift workshops from Pearl Harbor to Espiritu Santo, welders hunched over glowing seams, machinists milled new shafts, and electricians rewired scorched systems. Their work was often invisible to the headlines, but sailors knew. "The men in the yards fight as hard as we do," an officer aboard Yorktown remarked before Midway. Pearl Harbor Repair Yard Oral Histories, 1942. For the Japanese, the opposite truth weighed heavily. Their naval command had gambled everything on swift, decisive blows. They had not prepared for a war of repair and replenishment. Their own shipyards were overburdened, their resources limited, and their industrial base dwarfed by America's. Each time an American carrier returned, it drove home the same bitter reality: Japan could not fight attrition. Even in victory, such as Santa Cruz in October 1942, where Hornet was sunk and Enterprise heavily damaged, the Americans absorbed the blow and kept fighting. Japan could not afford such victories. Japanese Naval General Staff Report, November 1942. Beyond strategy and morale, the logistical implications were vast. The U.S. Navy pioneered forward repair bases, using floating dry docks, repair tenders, and prefabricated kits. Ships no longer had to return all the way to Pearl Harbor or San Diego. They could be patched at Espiritu Santo, Nouméa, or Ulithi. Engineers like Rear Admiral Howard L. Vickery, working with the Maritime Commission, developed mobile repair units that could be shipped to frontline anchorages. This cut turnaround time from months to weeks, sometimes days. Maritime Commission Report, 1943. Japan never developed a comparable system, leaving their ships stranded between battle and distant dry dock. The effect compounded over time. By 1943, while Japan struggled to replace its losses, the U.S. was not only repairing ships, but also launching new carriers at a staggering rate. Essex-class fleet carriers, each capable of carrying over 90 aircraft, slid down the ways of Newport News and Brooklyn. Light carriers of the Independence class, converted from cruiser hulls, added flexibility. Repair and new construction together created a tidal wave Japan could not resist. U.S. Navy Shipbuilding Report, 1943. The hidden advantage of quick repair bought time for this new fleet to arrive, ensuring that America never suffered a true carrier famine. Psychological assessments after the war reveal how deeply this advantage shook Japanese officers. In U.S. interrogations, many admitted disbelief at America's capacity to reconstitute losses so quickly. "We thought we had 6 months," one Japanese staff officer recalled. But every battle, they returned sooner. It was as if time was on their side, not ours. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Naval Interrogations, 1946. Time, indeed, had become America's ally. Each day saved in a shipyard was another day of planes in the sky, bombs on target, and pressure on the empire. The human cost of this hidden advantage cannot be overlooked. Hundreds of yard workers were injured in the frantic rushes to restore ships. Men fell from scaffolds, suffered burns from molten steel, and inhaled fumes from emergency welding. In forward bases, machinists worked in tropical heat, surrounded by malaria, straining to jury-rig parts without proper tools. They were not counted in battle reports, but their sacrifices were inseparable from the victories. "They won battles without firing a shot," Admiral Nimitz later said of the repair crews. Nimitz's speech, 1946. As the war ground on, the doctrine of rapid repair became institutionalized. Damage control schools trained sailors in firefighting, counterflooding, and emergency welding. Portable pumps, hoses, and foam systems were standard issue by 1943. Naval engineers produced manuals filled with field improvisations, how to plug torpedo holes with mattresses and steel beams, how to run power through scorched bulkheads, and how to land planes on decks still smoldering. Damage Control Training Bulletin, 1943. Each improvisation meant a ship could survive one more strike and fight one more battle. BY 1944. The scale had shifted irreversibly. America's repaired veterans, Enterprise, Saratoga, and Yorktown, too, sailed alongside brand-new Essex-class giants at the Marianas, Leyte Gulf, and beyond. Japan's remaining carriers, few and fragile, could not match them. When Shokaku and Taiho were lost in 1944, Japan had no quick way to replace them. By the time of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the Japanese resorted to using carriers as decoys, stripped of aircraft, a hollow gesture of strength. U.S. Navy After-Action Report, October 1944. The hidden advantage of repair had matured into overwhelming superiority. Its legacy extended far beyond World War II. In the Cold War, U.S. doctrine emphasized rapid battle damage repair as central to carrier survival in a nuclear age. During the Gulf War and later conflicts, American carriers operated with the same ethos: strike, absorb damage if necessary, repair, and return. Today, network-centric warfare and modular ship design still carry the DNA of those frantic welds at Pearl Harbor and Espiritu Santo. The lesson was clear. Survival is not only about armor or firepower. It is about the ability to endure, recover, and fight again. Naval Historical Center Analysis, 1991. As the guns of World War II fell silent in 1945, Admiral Nimitz reflected on the long campaign. Our ships were beaten, but not defeated. Each time they fell, we lifted them again. His words captured the spirit of a navy that had outlasted an empire by refusing to stay broken. Nimitz Memoir, 1947. For the Japanese, the memory was bitter. They had faced an opponent whose strength was not merely in fleets, but in the will and capacity to rebuild them endlessly. In modern war, the lesson endures. Firepower can destroy, but only resilience can decide. The Japanese soldiers who could not believe their enemies' carriers had returned in days were witnessing more than a tactical surprise. They were witnessing the future of industrial warfare, a contest not of single battles, but of endurance, repair, and time itself.